Market stats came out for June 2024 and they weren't exactly a barn burner. We're going to go through some of the things that have happened in the month of June, even after the Bank of Canada announcement, and then break down what things are looking like on the detached, semi-detached, townhouse, and condo front. I'm Michael Ouzas. I'm a realtor here in Toronto. If you're curious about what's been happening on the ground level in Toronto real estate and want to know what's going on in a specific pocket in the city, because that's more important than ever right now, you can book in a call with me in the first link in the description down below. Right now, anytime we hear about market stats, it's pretty doom and gloom these days, especially any way the media wants to twist the data. We'll break down what's actually going on in the market on the ground level, and if you're a buyer or a seller, what you should be looking out for on either side of the transaction. Every month, I like to go through this data chart, but to be honest, I think that's just a lot of numbers and a little bit confusing. Let's skip through, or if you want to know in a nutshell, prices in the Greater Toronto Area down about 1.5% year over year. Inventory up to 3.8 months. If you're watching this channel, that's a super important metric to monitor. As we look at Toronto proper, prices up 2%. However, inventory up over that 4-month mark, putting us into a balanced market across the board, but not quite. And we're going to break that down very shortly. This is the chart that I find the most important right now when we're looking at the data. We take a look at the month of June. Number of sales, 6,200, lower than what we saw in March, but higher than February, and a significant portion below where things were last year in June of 2023. And if you remember last year in June 2023, they actually increased the rate by 0.25 basis points, and we saw that reflect in July. Now this year, they did decrease the rate by 0.25 basis points, but as noted, there have not been much of a change when it comes to activity in the market. In fact, we saw one of the highest number of active listings that we have seen in a very long time at about 23,600 active listings, which gives us a months of inventory of 3.8. As we discussed, months of inventory, typically it's a leading indicator when it comes to pricing. And as months of inventory has been increasing since the start of the year, we actually saw prices decrease from May to June by about $3,000. So not really a huge amount of decrease. I'd argue we're basically just flat month over month. And as we get into 3.8 months of inventory, that could make a new pressure on pricing going into the next month. So if you're a seller and you're looking to sell a property right now, pricing is super important in today's market, along with how it looks and how it's presented online. All super important factors to go along with your strategy when it comes to listing your property. If you're a buyer right now and you're taking a look on the market on Realtor.ca, basically 24,000 active listings is not an insignificant amount of listings. There are plenty of listings in all different price ranges and property types. One caution I will add though is that just because we're seeing a big amount of active listings, we're seeing a lot of not so great listings on the market or properties that need a significant amount of work. The properties that are fully renovated in desirable areas across the city are still performing pretty well in today's market and selling at market value. Stuff that needs a lot of work is generally sitting for a little bit more time, and it does require that initial investment of capital up front when you take over the property, especially if you want to get it renovated before moving in. Now, first time we've seen a drop here on this chart in basically a year, because things did go up last year, June and July. We finally saw a drop. First drop we've seen since February of 2022. Prices remain relatively flat as mentioned, and this is where things are looking. If we take a look across the board benchmark pricing for detached, semi-detached, rows and towns, and apartments or condos. What does all this mean for each property type? And we're just going to go through the city of Toronto, detached, semi-detached, townhouses, and condos individually to show where things were in March and how they've trended through June. Back in March, we had 830 active listings, 647 sales, 1.28 months of inventory, and an average price at about 1.7 million for detached. 1.28 months of inventory is a seller's market. And with that, we saw prices increase by about $100,000 from March. That being said, active listings doubled in April and went up again in May and continued rising into June. So now months of inventory has gone from 1.28 to just about 3 months of inventory. And as mentioned, usually that's a leading indicator with pricing. Pricing started to pull back here in the detached market from April and May and into June. It's also reflective of the timing. And generally, if properties are going to market in the detached sector, especially in these great areas, the ones that look the best, they are usually planning to get to market for that spring market. Now, taking a look at semi-detached, and we've seen that reflected in the pricing as we've gone along. 0.7 months of inventory. So basically more sales than active listings everything that was available in the market in semi-detached across the city was basically selling back in March. We saw a doubling of active listings in April, and then another 100 above that in May and in June. So 400 active listings in June, still 236 sales. So still 1.72 months of inventory, which, as we discussed, you take your active listing divided by sales. Properties for semi-detached are still moving in the city of Toronto. So anything with a Toronto address, especially in the desirable areas, are still moving. Average price 1.28, which is down from 1.4 in May, quite significantly actually, about $120,000 decrease in average pricing. And when we always factor in average pricing, it could be some of the lower end semis starting to sell now, the ones that need the work, which maybe weren't being absorbed here in May or even in April. Taking a look at your townhouses, row houses, a bit of a different story here. Looking in March, we had 400 active listings, 156 sales, 2.6 months of inventory. But as we went along here, we actually saw a decrease in active listings by about half. And this is the only sector of the market that we did see a decrease when it comes to listings. And when we look at condos very shortly, that'll tell a whole new story. That being said, only 63 sales. So not as many sales here in the townhouse market. 3.6 months of inventory. However, pricing definitely has increased. And this is interesting. We'll have to look into this a little bit more on why the jump went up about $400,000 from April to May. My initial guess is that we started to see the nicer or the higher end townhouses sell in June, and that's brought up prices here. And with 63 sales, not a ton of data here when it comes across the entire city of Toronto. That's not a lot of sales for the whole city of Toronto, and that could be reflective of the pricing, especially in some areas where if you're looking for a freehold property in some of the prime areas like a W6, which is Mimico, or in some of the other areas in the city that are very prominent, those bungalows that are really nice and 3 bedrooms, as an example, generally need a ton of work in that 1.3 price range, whereas you can get a really nice renovated townhouse in that 1.3 price range with a 3 bedrooms for those properties. So that could be why it's pulling prices up here. Now we take a look at condos, and this has been a really interesting sector to take a look at. And in my next video, which we'll discuss where an opportunity could be if you're a tenant looking to get into the market, or if you're even a first-time buyer or repeat buyer looking to upsize, downsize. This number of active listings, 6,200 across the board for Toronto, is extremely high. It's about 30% higher than where things were in February and March, and less sales, which brings us to 6 months of inventory. This is a true buyer's market for condos across the city of Toronto. That being said, average prices have been hanging on, which means that maybe sellers just really aren't taking less than what they feel their property is worth right now. If you are a buyer looking in the condo market right now, there are plenty of properties on the market, and it's just a matter of going to find what really works for you, taking your time, but also being ready to react. If you do find something that checks all your boxes, this could be a great time to try and find that great property at a really great price. If you're a seller looking to sell a condo right now, of course, there are plenty on the market and looking really good on the market and priced really well with a great strategy. Incredibly important now, basically more than ever with the amount of sales. Basically 1 in 6 are selling. So if someone's going out on showings, and generally with buyers, I'll take them to see 4 to 6 properties at the same time. One of those 6 properties could be an option for them, where the other 5, they might just go by the wayside, and then we look at another 5 the next day. So there are plenty of options out there when it comes to condos in the Toronto market. And I did want to add this one in as well, and this is condos in CO1, which is the largest cluster of condos in the entire city of Toronto. This is from Yonge to Dufferin and from Bloor to the Water, give or take. In January, 800 active listings, just under 200 sales. So you're looking at about 4 months of inventory at that time. We saw that come down just a touch to about 4 as well in February. And then things increased quite a bit into June. In fact, June at 7 months of inventory, there are 1,700 active listings in the city of Toronto right now when it comes to condos for Toronto CO1, so the downtown core, which presents a lot of opportunities for buyers. Only 232 sales, basically one of the lowest numbers we've seen of the year so far. 7 months of inventory puts us well into a buyer's market for condos in Toronto CO1. So if you are a buyer and you're looking to get into the market, or you're a tenant and you're wondering when is a good opportunity to start looking or maybe to jump on something in the condo market, 7 months of inventory generally presents a pretty great opportunity for buyers looking in the market. And again, if you're a seller, you want to be pretty sharp on your pricing and look pretty great when you're on the market as well. Those are your stats updates, and the data can be twisted any way imaginable. Like we talked about last year, year. Sales are down year over year. Pricing is basically flat. However, it's still down, and months of inventory has been increasing significantly, which is a very important metric and the metric that we're going to keep watching as we move forward. Generally, as those months of inventory go up, prices usually come down, although they are remaining relatively strong across the board, as we've just shown with a City of Toronto address. So that Greater Toronto area is much different than something with just a City of Toronto address. That's something to keep in mind as we keep going. Also, if you're curious maybe what property's been selling for in your area or what your neighbor sold, I've attached a link to the listed app, which ties directly into my MLS and shows all the sold data when going to navigate the market. So you can click on that link to get access to that data. And if you ever wanted to book in a call, first link down below. I'm Michael Ouzas. Thanks for watching.